priest recognizes the groom at the altar and then stops the wedding on the spot. Father Richard raised his hands to begin the nuptial blessing when his eyes met the groom's. The world seemed to stop in that instant. Those blue eyes, that birthmark on the neck, that smile he knew so well. It was impossible, but there he was, standing before him after 30 years. "I can't go on," whispered the priest, his voice trembling like the hands holding the prayer book. Jason Parker looked confused at the clergyman who had suddenly gone pale. His bride, Emily, 3 months pregnant and radiant in her white dress, gently touched her husband's arm. "Father Richard, are you all right?" asked Jason, concerned by the sudden change in the expression of the man he'd known for years in the small town of Crystal Springs in rural Pennsylvania. The priest closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control the wave of emotions overwhelming him. 30 years, 30 long years since he'd abandoned everything to follow what he believed was his calling. 30 years since he'd left a pregnant young woman behind. "Jason," he murmured, and something in the way he said the name sent a shiver down the young man's spine. "What do you mean, Father? You've known me since I was a child." Jason tried to smile, but the tension in the air was palpable. The guests in the small church began whispering restlessly. Mrs. Anderson, Emily's mother, stood up worriedly from the front row. She'd known Father Richard for decades and had never seen him like this. "I need to speak with you," said the priest, his voice still quiet but firm. "In private." "Father, we're in the middle of the ceremony," Emily interjected, her hand instinctively moving to her still subtle belly. "Can't it wait?" "It can't wait," repeated Father Richard, looking directly into the young woman's eyes. "Please come with me to the sacristy." Jason exchanged a confused glance with Emily. They'd planned this moment for months. The church was full of family and friends. What could be so urgent? "Just a few minutes," the priest pleaded, already heading toward the sacristy. Reluctantly, the couple followed him. In the small room at the back of the church, Father Richard leaned against the table where he kept his belongings, taking a deep breath. "Jason, can you show me your neck?" the priest asked. "What do you mean?" Jason instinctively stepped back. "Please just lower your shirt collar a little." Emily watched the scene, growing more bewildered by the second. Hesitantly, Jason loosened his tie and slightly lowered his collar. There it was, on the right side of his neck, a small, crescent-shaped birthmark. Father Richard felt his legs give way. He had to sit in the nearby chair. "My God," he murmured, covering his face with his hands. "Father, what's going on?" Emily stepped closer, worried. "Jason, were you adopted?" The question struck like lightning in the small room. Jason felt his blood run cold. "How do you know that?" he whispered. "Because," Father Richard lifted his face, eyes brimming with tears, "because I'm your father." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily recoiled as if she'd been slapped. Jason stared at the priest as though seeing a ghost. "That's impossible," said Jason, his voice hoarse. "You've been a priest for decades." "I wasn't always." Father Richard rose slowly. "Before entering the seminary, I was just Richard, a 22-year-old young man who fell hopelessly in love with a girl named Sarah." Emily leaned against the wall, feeling dizzy. The pregnancy already made her sensitive, and this revelation was too much to process. "Sarah Wilson," the priest continued. "She worked at her family's bakery right here in Crystal Springs. We dated for 2 years. When she got pregnant, I ran away." "You ran away?" Jason felt the anger rising in his throat. "You abandoned your own family?" "I was young, scared. My parents had pressured me to pursue a religious life since I was a child. When Sarah told me about the pregnancy, I panicked. I thought it was a sign from God, that I was being tested." "A sign from God?" Emily finally found her voice. "You left a pregnant woman and thought it was divine will?" Father Richard hung his head, ashamed. "I know how it sounds. I know there's no excuse for what I did. But I was young and afraid of responsibility, afraid of disappointing my family, afraid of not being a good father." So it was better to be no father at all, Jason shouted, startling Emily. Jason, please, she touched his arm. No, Emily. He pulled away. Are you hearing this? This man I respected, who was going to marry us, is the coward who abandoned me when I was still in my mother's womb. What happened to Sarah? Emily asked softly. Father Richard took a deep breath. She had you alone. She tried to raise you by herself for a few months, but the situation was too hard. Her family rejected her when they found out I had run away. She had no resources, no support. And you knew that? Jason clenched his fists. I found out later. When you were 6 months old, Sarah made the hardest decision of her life. She left you at the doorstep of St. Joseph's orphanage in the neighboring town with a letter explaining she couldn't raise you but loved you more than anything. How do you know all this? Emily asked skeptically. Because, Father Richard hesitated, because I started sending money anonymously to the orphanage after you were adopted. Jason felt like he'd been punched in the gut. You knew where I was the whole time. I found out when you were adopted by the Parker family. They were well known in the area, good people. I followed your life from afar all these years. You watched me? Jason was shaking with anger. How could you stay in this town, see me grow up and never say a word? Because I had no right, Father Richard began to cry. Because I had made a choice. Because I thought it would be better for you to have a real family than a father who ran from his responsibilities. Emily sat in one of the chairs, feeling sick. All this stress wasn't good for the baby. Emily, are you okay? Jason immediately turned to her, momentarily forgetting the argument. I feel dizzy, she murmured. I'll get water. Father Richard quickly stood up. No, Jason shouted. You're not getting anything. You don't get to take care of anyone in my family, not after 30 years. Jason, Emily held his hand. Please, I need water. Father Richard left the sacristy, leaving the couple alone. Emily watched her husband, seeing the pain and confusion in his eyes. How am I going to tell my family? Jason murmured. How do I explain that the priest who was going to marry us is my biological father who abandoned me? We'll figure it out, Emily tried to comfort him. But first, you need to calm down, and I need to understand this whole story better. Do you believe him? Do you believe he's really my father? Emily thought for a moment. The birthmark, Jason. How would he know about it? And the details about your adoption. You've always said you knew almost nothing about your origins. It was true. Jason had been adopted by the Parkers when he was a year old. His adoptive parents had always been loving and honest about the adoption, but never knew details about his birth parents. Father Richard returned with a glass of water and some crackers. Thank you, Emily accepted the water, still avoiding direct eye contact with the priest. Jason, Father Richard approached cautiously, I know you have every right to hate me, but I need you to know one thing. Not a single day has passed in the last 30 years when I haven't thought about you. Thinking isn't enough, Jason replied coldly. Thinking didn't give me a father in my childhood. Thinking didn't explain where I came from. You're right. Nothing I say will justify what I did. But I need you to know that your mother, Sarah, she loved you deeply. The decision to leave you at St. Joseph's orphanage nearly destroyed her. What happened to her? Jason asked, despite his anger. She moved to Pittsburgh soon after, tried to start over. She married a few years later, had other children, but she always kept a baby photo of you. How do you know that? Emily interjected. Because, Father Richard hesitated again, because I kept in touch with her over the years. Not often, but she would reach out sometimes, especially on special occasions. Your birthday, Christmas? Jason felt his legs tremble. He sat down beside Emily. Is she alive? Yes. She lives in Pittsburgh with her family. She always wanted to find you, but I convinced her not to. I said it would be better to leave you in peace with your new family. You had no right to make that decision for her, Emily said, outraged. Or for him. I know I made mistake after mistake, but at the time I thought I was protecting everyone. At that moment, loud knocks on the sacristy door interrupted them. Father Richard? It was Mrs. Anderson's voice. Is everything all right in there? The guests are getting worried." The three exchanged glances. Outside, a church full of people waited for answers. "What are we going to say?" Emily whispered. "The truth." Jason stood up, making a decision. "I can't marry on top of a lie. I can't start my family on secrets." "Jason, think carefully," Father Richard warned him. "This will shake a lot of people. Your adoptive family, the guests, the entire community." "And you think I care?" Jason laughed bitterly. "You destroyed my life in a matter of minutes. You think I care what people will think?" Emily stood and took her husband's arm. "Jason, don't make decisions in the heat of the moment. Think about our family, our baby." "That's exactly who I'm thinking about." Jason looked at her. "I grew up not knowing where I came from, not knowing who my real parents were. I don't want my child growing up hearing lies." "But it doesn't have to be now at our wedding ceremony." "It does." Jason opened the sacristy door. "Because I won't let this man marry us knowing who he really is." Outside, Mrs. Anderson waited anxiously with a few other relatives. "My son, what's going on?" asked Mrs. Thompson, Jason's adoptive mother. Jason looked at the woman who had raised him with so much love and felt his heart break. How could he tell her he'd discovered the identity of his biological father? "Mom," his voice faltered, "I need to tell you something." Mrs. Thompson immediately sensed something serious was happening. At 65, she had raised Jason as her only child after years of unsuccessful attempts to conceive. That boy was the light of her life. "Jason, you're scaring me. Father Richard is my biological father." The words hit the small group like a bomb. Mrs. Anderson clutched her chest. Mrs. Thompson turned pale as paper. "What do you mean, my son?" Mrs. Thompson whispered. "He just told me. He's the one who abandoned my birth mother when she was pregnant." Father Richard stepped out of the sacristy, his face red with shame. "Mrs. Thompson," he approached, "I can explain." "Explain?" Mrs. Thompson found her voice, and it carried decades of pent-up pain. "Explain how you abandoned your own son and then stayed here in town watching him grow up without saying a word." "Emily, please, don't call me by my name," she shouted, startling everyone. Mrs. Thompson never raised her voice. "You don't have the right to call me by my name after what you did." Other guests began to gather, curious about the commotion. Among them was Robert Parker, Jason's adoptive father, who had gone to the restroom and was returning. "What's going on here?" Robert asked, seeing his wife upset. "Robert," Mrs. Thompson turned to her husband, her eyes filled with tears. "Father Richard is Jason's biological father." Robert fell silent for a few seconds, processing the information. Then, to everyone's surprise, he laughed. "Robert," Mrs. Thompson looked at him confused. "I've always known," he said calmly. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Everyone was shocked by Robert's revelation. Jason felt as if the world was collapsing around him once again. "What do you mean you've always known?" Jason asked, incredulous. Robert took a deep breath, looking at his wife with tenderness. "Emily, my love, forgive me for not telling you sooner. But when we adopted Jason, I did some research into his background. I found out about Sarah and Father Richard. And you never told me." Mrs. Thompson leaned against the wall, feeling betrayed by all the important men in her life. "I didn't want you to know because I was afraid it would change something between you and Jason. You loved that boy so much from the very first day." "That wouldn't have changed anything," Mrs. Thompson shouted. "Jason has always been and will always be my son. I know, my love. But at the time, I thought it was better not to complicate things." Emily watched the whole family drama unfold and felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. The stress was starting to affect her pregnancy. "Jason," she called softly, "I'm not feeling well again." "Emily." Jason immediately turned to her, momentarily forgetting the family argument. "I think I need to sit down." Mrs. Anderson quickly brought a chair. Emily sat down, taking deep breaths. "Maybe we should take you to the doctor," Mrs. Anderson suggested. No, Mom, I think it's just the stress, but I need some time to process all this. Jason knelt beside Emily's chair. Sweetheart, I'm sorry. I didn't want you to go through this on our special day. Jason? She cupped his face in her hands. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. But what now? What do we do? There's a church full of people waiting for us to get married, and I just found out the priest is my father. Father Thomas, Mrs. Anderson reminded them. From the neighboring town, he could come officiate if we call him now. No, Jason stood up. I'm not getting married today. I can't. I need time to understand all of this. Jason, Father Richard approached hesitantly. Please, don't let my past mistakes ruin your happiness today. My happiness? Jason laughed bitterly. You think I can be happy knowing the man who was supposed to bless my marriage is the same one who abandoned my birth mother? Jason's right, Emily said, struggling to stand. We need time. Everyone needs time. But the guests, the reception, everything's already paid for, Mrs. Anderson tried to reason. Money can be recovered, Mum, but trust, respect, that takes time to rebuild. At that moment, a woman in her 60s appeared at the church entrance. Everyone turned to look at the unfamiliar woman with graying hair and strikingly familiar blue eyes. Sarah? Father Richard whispered, turning pale. The woman approached slowly, her eyes fixed on Jason. I'm sorry to interrupt. Her voice was soft but firm. But I was passing through town and noticed the commotion at the church. I asked around and was told there was a wedding, when I learned the groom's name was Jason Parker. She stopped speaking and simply stared at Jason, her eyes filling with tears. My son, she murmured. Jason felt his legs go weak again. In just an hour, he had discovered who his birth parents were. Are you Sarah? He asked quietly. Yes, and you're even more handsome than I imagined. Sarah stepped closer, but kept a respectful distance. How did you know I was here? Jason asked. Richard called me last night. She glanced at the priest with an unreadable expression. He said you were getting married today and that he'd be officiating. I couldn't stay away. You came all the way from Pittsburgh just to see me. Jason was clearly emotional. I should have come much sooner. Sarah began to cry. I should have looked for you years ago. But Richard always convinced me it was better not to interfere in your life. Richard? Emily noticed Sarah referred to the priest by his first name, not his title. You two still keep in touch? Sarah and Father Richard exchanged a loaded glance. We talk from time to time, Sarah admitted. Mostly about you, Jason. Richard always told me how you were doing, how you were in school, when you graduated. You knew everything about my life and never came to find me. Jason felt the anger surging back. I wanted to, Sarah pleaded. So many times I got in the car and drove to Crystal Springs determined to see you. But when I got here and saw you happy with your family, I couldn't bring myself to disrupt that. You had no right to make that decision for me, Jason shouted. No one had the right to decide whether I should meet my birth mother or not. Mrs. Thompson, who had been silently observing, stepped closer to Sarah. Mrs. Wilson, she said firmly, but respectfully. I'm Clara Parker, Jason's adoptive mother. Sarah turned to the woman who had raised her son. Mrs. Thompson, her voice faltered. I wanted to thank you for taking care of my boy, for giving him the love I couldn't. You were so young, Mrs. Thompson said with surprising understanding. And all alone. I understand why you made the choice you did. But I never stopped loving him, Sarah wept. Not a single day passed without me thinking of him. I know, Mrs. Thompson gently touched Sarah's arm. A mother always knows. Jason watched the interaction between the two women with mixed emotions. On one hand, he was moved by his adoptive mother's generosity. On the other, he was still processing 30 years of absence. What now? Emily asked, still seated in the chair. What do we do with a church full of waiting guests? Everyone turned to look toward the nave, where dozens of people were indeed waiting anxiously. I'll talk to them, Jason decided. I'll explain there's been an issue and the wedding will be postponed. Jason, Father Richard called out, let me explain to the guests. It's my responsibility. No, Jason was firm. You've done enough. This is my responsibility now. Jason walked toward the nave, followed by Emily, who insisted on accompanying him despite her discomfort. The guests immediately sensed something was wrong from the couple's expressions. Everyone, Jason began, his voice echoing through the church. Thank you for coming to celebrate with us today, but unfortunately we'll have to postpone the ceremony. Murmurs of surprise and concern spread through the pews. Something happened that changed everything today. We need time to process and resolve some important family matters. Is the baby okay? Shouted one of Emily's cousins. The baby is fine, Emily replied. It's a personal matter. We apologize for the inconvenience. Will the wedding still happen? Asked one of Jason's uncles. Jason looked at Emily, who shook her head. No, we're canceling everything for today. As soon as we have a new date, we'll let you know. Slowly, the guests began to leave, many stopping to hug the couple and offer their support. Within minutes, the church was empty, except for the immediate family and the main figures of that revelation. I think we should go home, Mrs. Anderson suggested. Emily needs to rest. I agree, Jason said. Today's been too much for everyone. Jason, Sarah called out as he started to walk away. Can we talk tomorrow? I know you need time, but I came from far away and... Jason hesitated. He looked at Emily, who nodded encouragingly. Tomorrow morning, at the Central Square, 10 o'clock. Thank you, Sarah smiled through her tears. And you? Jason turned to Father Richard. I don't want to see you for a while. I need to figure out what to do with this whole situation. Father Richard simply nodded sadly. On the way home, Jason and Emily sat silently in the back seat of Mrs. Anderson's car, their hands intertwined, both lost in thought. Do you regret it? Emily asked softly. Finding out the truth? No. Finding out on our wedding day? Yes. And choosing to marry me even though our family is more complicated than we imagined? Jason turned to look at her, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes. Never, he kissed her forehead. You and our baby are the only certainty I have right now. When they got home, Mrs. Anderson insisted on making a calming tea for Emily. Mrs. Thompson was visibly shaken, alternating between hugging Jason and crying quietly. Mom, Jason sat beside her in the kitchen. You know this doesn't change anything between us, right? I know, son, but it's hard. Finding out you've lived with your biological father your whole life without knowing, discovering that my husband knew and never told me. Robert, Jason called his adoptive father, who was leaning against the sink. Why didn't you ever say anything? Robert took a deep breath before answering. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew the truth, it would change something between us. You were everything your mother and I ever wanted. A family. But a real family doesn't keep secrets from each other, Emily said gently. You're right, Robert agreed. And I regret not being honest from the start. At least now everything's out in the open, Jason said. No more secrets. That night, Jason barely slept. He lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about how his life had completely changed in just a few hours. Beside him, Emily also tossed and turned. Can't sleep? He whispered. How could I? She turned to him. We found out the priest we've known our whole lives is your father. You met your biological mother. Our wedding was cancelled. That's a lot for one day. And you? How are you feeling about all this? Emily thought for a moment before answering. Confused. Sad that you had to go through so much today, but also relieved. Relieved. Because now you know. You won't have that emptiness about your origins anymore. It always bothered you, even if you didn't admit it. It was true. All his life, Jason had wondered about his biological parents. He'd made up stories in his head, imagined what they were like, why they'd left him. Do you think I should forgive them? He asked. I think you should hear the full story first. Perhaps there are more things you don't know yet. The next morning, Jason arrived at the central square a few minutes before 10. Sarah was already there, sitting on a bench near the bandstand, looking around nervously. "Good morning," he said, approaching. "Good morning." She smiled timidly. "Thank you for coming." Jason sat on the bench beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Tell me about yourself," he said simply. Sarah took a deep breath before beginning. "I was 19 when I got pregnant with you. I was very young, very naive. I worked at my family's bakery and thought I knew everything about life. And my father, Richard. Richard was different from the other boys in town. He read a lot, dreamed of making a difference in the world. He talked about vocation, about serving God. I fell in love with his passion for life. But he abandoned you." Sarah sighed sadly. "He panicked when he found out about the pregnancy. His family always pressured him to follow a religious path. His father was very strict, very traditional. Richard grew up believing his destiny was to serve the church. Does that justify leaving you pregnant?" "It doesn't justify it," Sarah was firm. "But it explains it. He was young and scared, just like me." "Why did you leave me at the orphanage?" This was the question Jason feared most but needed to ask. "Because I had no choice." Sarah began to cry. "My family kicked me out when they found out Richard had run away. I had no money, no job, no one to help me. But did you try to raise me? I tried for 6 months. 6 months in a rented room, working as a maid to pay the rent. You cried from hunger because I often couldn't even afford milk." Jason's heart ached, imagining his young, desperate mother. "It was the hardest decision of my life," Sarah continued. "But I knew you deserved a family that could give you what I couldn't." "And after? What happened to you then?" "I moved to Pittsburgh, got a job at a factory, spent years trying to forget, trying to move on. I met my husband when you were 5. Does he know about me?" "He does. He always has. Michael is a good man. He understood my story. We had 2 daughters together. I have sisters." Sarah smiled through her tears. "You do. Jessica is 22, Amanda is 19. They've always known they had an older brother." Jason felt a wave of conflicting emotions. On one hand, he was happy to know he had sisters. On the other, it hurt that they grew up knowing about him while he knew nothing about them. "Do they want to meet me?" "Very much. In fact, Jessica wanted to come with me yesterday, but I thought it might be too much." "And Richard? What's your real relationship like now?" Sarah hesitated before answering. "It's complicated. We've never been able to completely let go of each other. Not romantically," she quickly clarified, "but there's a connection because of you." "How so?" "Richard always felt guilty, very guilty. He came to me a few years after you were adopted, asking for forgiveness. From then on, we started talking occasionally." "And you forgave him?" "I did. I held on to resentment for a long time, but I realized it was only hurting me. Richard truly became a priest, devoted his life to helping others. I think it was his way of trying to make amends." Jason stayed silent for a few minutes, processing everything he'd heard. "I don't know if I can forgive either of you," he finally said. "I understand," Sarah replied, "and I don't expect you to forgive. I just hope that one day you might understand that despite all the mistakes we made, you were always loved." "Loved from afar," Jason said bitterly. "Sometimes loving from afar is the greatest proof of love there is." Sarah looked him in the eyes. "Because it hurts. It hurts every day." At that moment, Emily appeared in the square, looking for Jason. "Sorry to interrupt," she approached, "but you promised you'd be back for lunch." "Emily," Jason stood up. "This is Sarah, my birth mother. Sarah, this is Emily, my fiancée." "Nice to meet you." Sarah stood and extended her hand. "The pleasure is mine." Emily shook her hand. "Jason told me your story. It must have been so hard." "It was. But look at the wonderful man he's become. You two raised an incredible son," Sarah said to Emily, but looked at Jason. "Thank you," Emily smiled. "Jason, we need to go. Your mother made lunch for everyone." "Will the whole family be there?" Jason asked. "Yes. Your adoptive parents think we should talk about all this together." Jason turned to Sarah. "Would you like to join us for lunch?" Sarah was surprised by the invitation. Are you sure? No, Jason was honest. But I think we've hidden enough truths already. It's time to lay everything out on the table. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The lunch at the Parker house was tense but necessary. Mrs. Thompson had set the table for 5, but when Jason arrived with Sarah, she quickly made room for one more. "Welcome," Mrs. Thompson said to Sarah, despite the visible tension. "Thank you for having me in your home," Sarah replied respectfully. During the meal, Robert broke the silence. "Sarah, I know you and Jason talked this morning. Is there anything you think we should know?" Sarah looked at Jason, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd like you to know I've always been grateful you adopted Jason. I know he had a wonderful family with you." "But?" Mrs. Thompson sensed there was more. "But it always hurt not being part of his life, watching him grow up from afar, hearing about his achievements through others." "Through others?" Robert asked. Jason sighed. "Father Richard always kept her updated about my life. They stayed in touch all these years." "Stayed in touch?" Mrs. Thompson tensed. "What do you mean, stayed in touch?" "Not romantically," Sarah quickly clarified. "But we talked about Jason. Father Richard felt guilty and I needed to know how my son was doing." "And he never suggested you reveal yourselves?" Emily asked. "No. In fact, he always convinced me otherwise. Said Jason was happy and that our presence would only complicate things." "Maybe he was right," Mrs. Thompson murmured. "Mom," Jason gently chided, "I had the right to know." "You did," Robert agreed. "And I apologize for knowing and not telling you. That was my mistake." "Robert, did you know they stayed in touch?" Mrs. Thompson asked her husband. "No. That I didn't know." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "There's one more thing you should know." Everyone turned to her. Father Richard sent money. Every month ever since Jason was adopted. A small amount, but steady." "Money to whom?" Jason asked, confused. "To you, to help raise him." The silence that followed was unsettling. Robert and Mrs. Thompson exchanged glances. "We never received any money," Mrs. Thompson said firmly. "What do you mean?" Sarah was confused. "Father Richard always told me he sent an amount every month through the bank." "To which account?" Robert asked. "He said it was to the Parker family's account." Robert stood from the table. "I'll get our bank statements from the past few years." As Robert searched for the documents, Sarah explained further. "Father Richard told me he looked into you before the adoption was finalized. Who found out you didn't have much money and wanted to help anonymously. We really didn't have much," Mrs. Thompson admitted. "It was hard raising Jason on Robert's elementary school teacher salary and my work as a seamstress. That's why Richard thought he was helping." Robert came back with a stack of bank statements. "Let's check." He began flipping through the papers. "There's nothing here, and nothing here either. Sarah, are you sure the money was being sent to us?" "I am. Richard showed me the receipts." "Then where was that money going?" Emily asked. They all exchanged glances, arriving at the same terrible conclusion. "He wasn't sending any money," Jason murmured. "He was lying to you." Sarah turned pale. "That can't be. He showed me the receipts." "Fake receipts," Robert concluded. "Or he was transferring the money to some other account." "Why would he do that?" Sarah began to cry. "To ease his own conscience," Jason replied with renewed anger. "To make you think he was taking some responsibility." 30 years, Sarah whispered. 30 years believing he was helping you. Sarah, Mrs. Thompson touched her hand. "I'm so sorry you were deceived too. I need to confront him." Sarah stood up. "I need to understand why he did this." "We're coming with you," Jason decided. "Jason, I'm not sure that's a good idea," Emily warned him. "Why? He deceived all of us. He lied to you, my birth mother, for 30 years, pretended to help when he actually did nothing." "I agree with Jason," Robert said. "That man owes us an explanation." An hour later, the group stood at the door of the parish house. Father Richard answered, visibly worn down. "Jason, Sarah," he greeted them in surprise. I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk, Sarah said firmly. Of course, come in. In the simple living room of the parish house, Father Richard offered water and coffee, but everyone refused. Richard, Sarah got straight to the point. Why did you lie to me about the money? Father Richard turned pale. What money? The money you said you sent every month to the Parker family. They never received anything. Father Richard lowered his head, clearly caught in a lie. Sarah, I can explain. Then explain. Jason crossed his arms. I wanted to send the money. I really did. But my salary as a priest was always very low. It barely covered my own needs. Then why lie? Sarah shouted. Why pretend for 30 years that you were helping? Because I knew if you found out I wasn't doing anything, you'd hate me even more. And you thought deceiving me was better. Sarah was furious. Richard, Mrs. Thompson intervened, do you realize your lie may have kept Sarah from making other decisions? If she'd known you weren't helping, she might have looked for Jason sooner. I know. Father Richard began to cry. I know I made mistake after mistake, but I was afraid of losing what little contact I had with you. Contact? Jason laughed bitterly. What contact? You watched me grow up pretending to be just the town priest. You talked to my birth mother while feeding her lies. That's not contact, that's manipulation. Jason's right, Robert agreed. You manipulated every situation to keep your emotional comfort, without thinking about what was best for others. Father Richard stood up and began pacing the room. Do you think this was easy for me? Do you think it didn't hurt to watch Jason grow up knowing he was my son? Do you think it didn't hurt to talk to Sarah knowing I'd destroyed her life? But you chose this, Sarah shouted. No one forced you to run when you found out about the pregnancy. No one forced you to join the seminary. You chose all of this. And I regret it. Father Richard turned to them. Every single day of my life, I regret it. Regret doesn't change anything, Jason said coldly. It doesn't give me back 30 years of unanswered questions. It doesn't give Sarah back the experience of being a mother. I know nothing I do will ever fix what I broke. Emily, who had been silently watching the whole discussion, finally spoke. Father Richard, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you decide to become a priest? Really? Was it a calling, or was it to run away from your responsibilities? The question caught Father Richard off guard. He was silent for a long moment. At first, he admitted, it was to run away. I was scared, I was young, and the seminary seemed like a way out. But over time, I truly found purpose in religious life. Even knowing you'd abandoned a son, Emily pressed, especially because of that. I dedicated my life to helping other families because I knew I'd failed my own. And did that give you peace? Sarah asked. No, it never gave me peace, but it gave me purpose. Jason studied the man he had just discovered was his father. He saw a broken man, full of regret, one who had spent 30 years running from the consequences of his actions. Richard, he finally said, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, but there's one thing I need to know. Anything. Do you love me? Truly? Or am I just a burden on your conscience? Father Richard looked Jason straight in the eyes. I love you, he said, his voice thick. I always have. From the day you were born, watching you grow up from afar was both a privilege and a torture. Then why did you never fight for me? Why did you never say anything? Because I thought you were better off without me, and maybe I was right. That wasn't your decision to make, Sarah interjected. Not yours, not mine, it was his when he grew up. You're right. Once again, you're right. And I was wrong. Mrs. Thompson, who had been quietly observing the whole conversation, stood up. Richard, you need to leave the priesthood. Everyone turned to her, surprised. What do you mean, Mrs. Thompson? Father Richard asked. You joined the church to run from your responsibilities. Now your responsibilities have found you. It's time to face who you really are. But I've dedicated my whole life to the church. You've dedicated your life to a lie, Jason said. The community deserves to know who the man they respect as a priest really is. And if I leave the priesthood, what happens to me? You'll have to figure that out, Robert answered. Just like Jason had to figure out who he was without knowing his roots. Just like Sarah had to figure out how to live after losing a child. Father Richard sank heavily into his chair. And then? If I leave the church, what happens between us? Jason looked at Emily, who nodded encouragingly. Then we'll talk, Jason said. When you're being honest about who you really are, maybe we can start building something. And me? Sarah asked. What happens to me in all of this? Jason turned to her. You have to be honest, too. Stop hiding behind guilt and fear. If you really want to be part of my life, you'll have to fight for it. No more waiting for permission. Sarah nodded in understanding. You're right. I've been a coward too. We've all been cowards in some way, Mrs. Thompson concluded. Me for not insisting on knowing more about Jason's origins. Robert for hiding what he knew. But now it's time to be brave. 2 weeks had passed since the revelation at the altar. Jason and Emily had postponed their wedding indefinitely, focusing on processing everything that had happened. Sarah had returned to Pittsburgh, but called Jason every day. Father Richard had asked to speak with the bishop about his situation. The news that he had a son had spread quickly through the small town, causing a stir in the religious community. On a Thursday morning, Jason received an unexpected call. Jason, it's Jessica. Jessica? Jason took a moment to remember. My sister? Yes. Mom gave me your number. I hope you don't mind. No, of course not. How are you? Eager to meet you. Mom told me everything that happened there. Crazy, right? Jason laughed. It was the first time he'd laughed in 2 weeks. Crazy doesn't even cover it. And you? How are you handling all this? Pretty well, actually. Amanda and I always knew about you, so it wasn't a surprise. The surprise was finding out Dad Richard was lying about the money. Dad Richard? That's what we've always called him. Mom never hid from us that he was your father, too. Jason felt a pang of pain. His sisters had grown up knowing about him, and even seeing Father Richard as a father figure. Do you still keep in touch with him? We do. He's always been present in our lives. Not officially, but he's always been around. And now, after finding out about the lies, now we're all hurt. Mom, especially. She feels betrayed that he lied for so long. And with me? How do you feel about me? Curious. Jessica laughed. Amanda is dying to meet you. Actually, we wanted to come there this weekend if you're okay with it. Jason hesitated. He was still processing having a biological mother. Now he'd have to deal with sisters too. Jason? Jessica noticed his hesitation. We understand if you're not ready. I know this must be really confusing for you. No, it's not that. It's just a lot of change all at once. We can wait as long as you need. Actually, Jason decided, I think it'd be good to meet you. Emily always says family is built little by little. Emily is your fiancée, right? Mom mentioned her. She sounds like a special person. She's the best person I know. By the way, she's pregnant. You're going to be aunts. Really? Jessica squealed with joy. Amanda, come here. Jason is having a baby. Jason heard excited voices on the other end of the line and couldn't help but smile. Maybe having an extended family wasn't so scary after all. So you can come this weekend, he decided. I'll let Emily know. Thank you, Jason. You don't know how much this means to us. That night, Jason told Emily about Jessica's call. I think it's wonderful, she said, stroking her barely visible bump. Our baby will have aunts, and cousins too, if they have kids in the future. Don't you think we're moving too fast? Jason asked, lying beside her in bed. I think we've wasted enough time already. 30 years, Jason. 30 years without knowing your biological family. Let's not waste any more. And Richard? What do you think I should do about him? I think you should wait and see what he does. If he really will leave the priesthood, if he'll take responsibility. And if he does. If he comes to me wanting to build a relationship. Emily turned to look Jason in the eyes. Then you decide if you want to give him a chance. But be honest with yourself about what you really want, not what you think you should want. On Saturday, Jessica and Amanda arrived in Crystal Springs. Jason waited for them at the bus station with Emily, as nervous as if it were a blind date. When the two young women stepped off the bus, it wasn't hard to recognize them. Both had the same blue eyes as Jason and Sarah. Jason? The taller one approached hesitantly. Jessica? That's me. She smiled and, to Jason's surprise, hugged him tightly. Wow, you're taller than I imagined. And you're Amanda. Jason turned to his younger sister, who looked almost like a copy of Sarah in her youth. Hi, brother, Amanda said simply, hugging him too. Jason felt something warm in his chest. For the first time in 2 weeks, something good was happening. This is Emily, he introduced his fiancée. The famous Emily, Jessica smiled. Mom wouldn't stop talking about how understanding you've been through this whole crazy situation. It wasn't easy, Emily admitted, but family is complicated, and now you're part of ours. Over the weekend, Jason discovered he had a lot in common with his sisters. Jessica was studying education and dreamed of working with children just like him, a physical education teacher. Amanda was finishing high school and wanted to study nursing. It's funny, Amanda remarked during Sunday lunch. We didn't even know each other, but we have similar interests. Genetics, Jessica laughed. Mom always said you'd probably be like us. And her? How is she handling all this? Jason asked. Better, Amanda replied. Finding out Father Richard's lies was a shock, but she said she feels relieved to finally know the real you. Father Richard, Jason repeated. It's strange hearing you call him that. Why? Jessica asked. Because to me, he was always just the priest. I never thought of him as a father figure. But he always asked about you, Amanda said. Always wanted to know how you were doing, if you were doing well in school, if you were happy. He asked you that? Mum, and she told us. I think it was his way of feeling close to you. Jason processed that. It was hard to reconcile the image of the priest he knew with that of a man who genuinely cared about him. And if he really leaves the priesthood? Emily asked. Do you think he'll try to get closer to Jason? Definitely, Jessica said. Actually, he already called Mom to ask if she thought you'd be willing to see him. What did she say? That only you could decide. On Monday, after Jessica and Amanda returned to Pittsburgh, Jason got a call from Father Richard. Jason, can you come to the church? I need to show you something. Father, I don't know if I'm ready to... Please, it's important. Reluctantly, Jason went to the church. He found Father Richard in the sacristy, packing his belongings into boxes. Are you moving? Jason asked. I'm leaving the priesthood, Father Richard said simply. I spoke with the bishop last week. He agreed it's for the best. Jason was surprised. Though he'd suggested it, he hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. And now? What will you do? I'll just be Richard again, he said with a sad smile. I'll look for an ordinary job, an ordinary life. At 52, I'm starting over. And the church, the community? Father Thomas will take over the parish. The community will adjust. People are more resilient than we think. Jason looked at the boxes scattered around the sacristy. A whole life dedicated to the church packed away. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know I'm doing this for you, for us, for a chance to really try being father and son. Richard, Jason sighed, I can't promise anything. I can't promise we'll be able to build a relationship. I know, but I have to try. I need to at least try to be the father I should have been from the start. And if it doesn't work, if I decide I don't want you in my life, then at least I'll know I tried, and you'll know that this time I didn't run away. Jason looked at the man in front of him. For the first time, he didn't see the respected priest of the community. He saw only a scared man trying to right old wrongs. Okay, he said finally. We can try. Richard's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really. But there are conditions. Any condition. First, no more lies, never again, about anything. Promise. Second, you're going to get to know Emily properly. She'll be your daughter-in-law, the mother of your grandchild. If you want to be part of my life, you'll have to be part of hers too. Of course. Third, you'll have to meet my real family, Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Robert. They're my parents, biology aside. I understand. And fourth, if I ever decide this isn't working, you'll respect my decision. Richard hesitated for a moment, but nodded. Promise. 2 weeks later, the town of Crystal Springs witnessed something unprecedented, a former priest working as a salesman at Mr. Thompson's hardware store. It's strange seeing Richard without his cassock, Mrs. Johnson remarked at the bakery. But he looks happier, Mrs. Wilson observed, lighter. And it was true. Richard was adjusting to civilian life better than anyone expected. He had rented a small house near downtown and was trying to build a normal routine. Jason visited him twice a week. At first, their conversations were tense and formal, but gradually, they began to know each other as people, not as priest and parishioner. "Tell me about your childhood," Jason asked during one of these visits. "It wasn't easy," Richard admitted. "My father was very strict. From a young age, he said I was meant to serve God. My mother was sweeter, but she never contradicted him." "Did you want to be a priest as a child?" "No, I wanted to be a teacher or a journalist. I loved writing, reading, but my father said those were worldly professions." "And when you met Sarah?" Richard smiled at the memory. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, always humming while working at the bakery, had the sweetest smile in the world. "Did you really love her?" "Deeply. Sometimes I think I never stopped loving her." "Then why did you run?" Richard sighed heavily. "Because I was a coward. Because I feared my father's reaction more than I wanted to fight for the woman I loved. If you could go back in time, I'd stay, marry her, raise you, be the man I should have been from the start." Jason believed him. For the first time since learning the truth, he genuinely believed Richard. Meanwhile, Emily entered her 5th month of pregnancy. Her belly was clearly visible now, and they had found out they were having a boy. "What about the name?" Sarah asked during one of her monthly visits. "Have you chosen one?" "We're considering a few," Emily replied. "Jason wants something that honors both his adoptive and biological families." "And you? What do you think?" "I think the right name will come at the right time." Jason walked in just then, returning from another conversation with Richard. "How was it today?" Emily asked. "Good. He told me about his childhood. I think I'm starting to understand why he made the choices he did." "Is that good or bad?" Sarah asked. "Good, I think. It's easier to forgive when you understand." "And do you want to forgive?" Sarah pressed. Jason thought for a moment. "I want to try. For me, for our son. I don't want him growing up in a family full of resentment." "Our son will be lucky," Emily smiled. "He'll have more grandparents than he can count." It was true. Between Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Robert, Sarah and her husband Michael, and now Richard, the baby would have a large, loving family. "By the way," Sarah said, "Michael and the girls want to come to the next ultrasound, if you don't mind." "Of course not," Jason said. "The more, the merrier." On the day of the ultrasound, the doctor's waiting room was packed. Along with Jason and Emily, there were Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Robert, Sarah, Michael, Jessica, and Amanda. Richard had asked if he could come too, but Jason still wasn't comfortable with it. "He's a healthy boy," the doctor confirmed. "Everything is perfect." "Can I know the approximate weight?" Michael asked. "About 14 ounces. He's growing very well." When they left the office, everyone was emotional. "Our first grandson," Mrs. Thompson said, hugging Jason. "Actually, it'll be my third," Sarah corrected gently. "Jessica and Amanda have already given me 2 little grandsons." "Oops, sorry," Mrs. Thompson felt embarrassed. "No need to apologize," Sarah smiled. "We'll have to learn to share, won't we?" It was interesting to see how the 2 women who had been Jason's mothers were handling each other. At first there was tension, but little by little they developed mutual respect. "So?" Jessica asked. "Have you decided on the baby's name yet?" "Not yet," Emily answered, "but we're getting close." "How about Richard?" Amanda suggested innocently. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. "Amanda," Sarah scolded her quietly. "What? It's his grandfather's name." "We don't know if Jason wants that," Sarah explained. Jason looked at his expanded family around him, everyone waiting for his reaction, everyone respecting his decision. "Actually," he finally said, "it wouldn't be a bad idea." "Really?" Emily looked at him surprised. "Richard is trying to be a different man. Maybe naming our son after him is a way to show I believe in that change." "Are you sure?" Mrs. Thompson asked. "I am. But not just Richard. Richard Robert. Honoring both my biological father and my adoptive father." Mr. Robert, who had stayed quiet until then, was moved. "Jason, you don't have to—" "I do," Jason interrupted. "You're my father just as much as he is. In fact, you're more. You raised me, taught me, were there for me. His name should be there too." 2 weeks later, Jason made an important decision. He called Richard. "Do you want to come over for dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "Are you sure?" "I am. Emily wants to get to know you better. And I want to tell you about the baby's name. You've already chosen." "We have. But I want to tell you in person." The next day, Richard arrived at Jason's house carrying a small wrapped gift. "What's this?" Jason asked. "Something I've kept all these years. I thought it was time to give it to you." Jason opened the package and found a small gold chain with a star-shaped pendant. "It was your mother's," Richard explained. "Sarah wore this chain when I met her. She left it at my place one of the last times we saw each other before I ran away." "You kept this for 30 years?" "I did. I always thought about returning it to her, but I never had the courage. Now I think it should stay with you." Jason held the chain, imagining Sarah young, wearing that pendant. "Thank you," he said simply. During dinner, Emily made sure to get to know Richard better. "Jason told me you always liked writing," she commented. "I do. In fact, I started writing a journal a few weeks ago, about everything that happened, the regrets, the hope of rebuilding my relationship with Jason. And how has that experience been? Hard, but necessary. I'm trying to understand why I made the decisions I did, so I don't repeat the same mistakes." "That's very mature of you," Emily said sincerely. After dinner, Jason decided it was time to share the baby's name. "Richard," he called. "Emily and I have decided on our son's name." "And what is it?" "Richard Robert, in honor of you and my adoptive father." Richard was silent for a long moment, clearly moved. "Jason," he finally said, "you can't imagine what this means to me." "It means I believe you can be a better grandfather than you were a father," Jason said honestly. "It means I'm willing to give you this chance. I won't let you down. Not this time." "I hope not," Jason replied. "Because if you do, there won't be a third chance." Richard nodded, understanding perfectly. The months passed quickly. Richard settled into his new civilian life. Jason and Emily rescheduled their wedding for after the baby's birth, and Sarah began visiting Crystal Springs more often. When Emily went into labor, the entire extended family gathered at the hospital. Mrs. Thompson and Sarah took turns calming Jason, who was more nervous than the mother-to-be. "Firstborns always make fathers like this," Mr. Robert laughed, remembering when Jason was born, technically when he was adopted. "Were you nervous when we adopted Jason?" Mrs. Thompson asked. "Very. I was afraid I wouldn't know how to be a father." "What about you?" Sarah asked Richard. "Were you nervous when you found out you were going to have a child?" "Terrified," Richard admitted. "That's why I ran. I didn't know how to handle the fear." "And now? Are you still afraid?" Mrs. Thompson asked. "I am. But this time I'll face the fear instead of running from it." When the baby was finally born, everyone was moved. Richard Robert Parker weighed 7 pounds and had the Parker family's blue eyes. "He's perfect," Jason said, holding his son in his arms. "He looks just like his father," Sarah observed. "And his grandfather's," Emily added, looking at Mr. Robert and Richard. When it was Richard's turn to hold his grandson, his hands trembled. "I've never held a baby before," so he admitted. Just support his head, Mrs. Thompson patiently guided him. When Richard finally held little Richard Robert, tears streamed down his face. "Hi, little one," he whispered. "Grandpa promises to be better with you than he was with your daddy." Jason watched the scene and felt something heal inside him. It wasn't complete forgiveness yet, but it was a start. 3 months later, Jason and Emily finally married. The ceremony was simple, officiated by Father Thomas in the same church where it had all begun. Richard was present as a guest, not as the officiant. During the vows, Jason looked at his family gathered in the pews, Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Robert in the front row next to Sarah and Michael. Jessica and Amanda held little Richard Robert, who slept peacefully. Richard sat a few rows back, respecting the space Jason still needed. "Emily," Jason said during his vows, "you taught me that family isn't just about blood or adoption. It's about choice. It's about deciding every day to love and support each other. Today I choose you, just as I choose our big, complicated but love-filled family." After the ceremony, during the celebration, Richard approached Jason. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For letting me be part of this, for giving me the chance to be your son's grandfather." "You still have a lot to prove," Jason said honestly, "but you're on the right path." "And if one day I can prove I've really changed, what happens then?" Jason looked at his family gathered around, Emily dancing with the baby, Sarah chatting animatedly with Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Robert teaching Michael how to play dominoes. "Then maybe you'll get what you've always wanted," Jason replied, "a real family." Months passed, and the new family's routine settled in. Richard visited Jason and Emily every week, always bringing a gift for his grandson. He had become a devoted grandfather, making up for decades of absence with constant presence. During one of these visits, when little Richard Robert was 6 months old, Jason made an important decision. "Richard," he said, "I want you to know something." "What is it?" "I forgive you." Richard stopped playing with the baby and looked at Jason in surprise. "Really? Really, it doesn't mean I've forgotten what happened. It doesn't mean it didn't hurt, but it means I'm ready to move on." "What changed?" Richard asked. "Seeing you with my son, seeing how dedicated you are to him, seeing that you truly learned from your mistakes." Richard was moved. "Jason, this means more to me than you can imagine. It means you can call me son now, and I can call you father." It was the first time Jason had used that word to refer to Richard. The impact was immediate and powerful. "Father," Richard repeated, as if testing how the word sounded. "I always wanted to hear you call me that. And I always wanted to have a father to call that," Jason admitted. At that moment, Emily walked into the room. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but there's a call for you, Jason. It's Sarah." Jason answered the phone. "Sarah, how are you?" "Jason, I need to tell you something. Michael and I are separating." "What? Why?" "It's a long story, but the point is, I'm moving to Crystal Springs." "Here? Why?" "Because I want to be close to you and my grandson. Because I wasted 30 years and I don't want to waste any more time." Jason fell silent, processing the news. "What about Jessica and Amanda?" "They're adults now. Jessica already graduated and got a job in Pittsburgh. Amanda is applying to nursing school here in the area. Are you sure about this?" "I am. I've already rented a house 2 blocks from you." "Sarah," Jason sighed, "you don't have to do this for me. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me, because I've finally learned that sometimes fighting for someone means being close, not far away." When Jason hung up, he shared the news with Richard and Emily. "How do you feel about it?" Emily asked. "Well, I think it's strange to think my birth mother will be living here, but I think it'll be good for Richard Robert to have all his grandparents nearby." "And me?" Richard asked. "What will it be like living near Sarah again?" "You'll have to figure it out," Jason replied. "But no lies this time, no secrets." A month later, Sarah officially moved to Crystal Springs. She rented a small house with a garden and quickly became part of the community. The first time she and Richard met after the move was at Jason's house during a Sunday lunch. "Sarah," Richard greeted her respectfully. "Richard," she replied, equally formal. "Listen," Jason intervened. "You two are my son's grandparents. You'll have to find a way to get along." "There's no problem between us," Sarah said. "It's just, we need to learn to be friends now." "Friends," Richard repeated. "I'd like that." Over time, Sarah and Richard developed a genuine friendship based on their shared love for their grandson. They often met up to take care of little Richard Robert when Jason and Emily needed to go out. "It's funny," Sarah remarked to Jason one day. "After all these years, we've managed to be the parents we couldn't be when we were young." "How so?" "We're both raising our grandson together. In a way, we're being a family for him." Jason smiled, realizing she was right. Despite all the complications, all the pain and disappointments, they had managed to build something beautiful. 2 years had passed since Richard Robert was born. The boy had grown up surrounded by love from multiple generations. He called Mrs. Thompson Grandma Thompson, Sarah Grandma Sarah, Mr. Robert Grandpa Robert, and Richard Grandpa Rich. "Won't he get confused with so many grandparents?" Emily once asked. "I think he'll grow up understanding that family can be complicated and beautiful at the same time," Jason replied. One Sunday afternoon, the whole family gathered in Jason and Emily's backyard. Mrs. Thompson and Sarah cooked lunch together, chatting animatedly about recipes. Mr. Robert and Richard were playing dominoes on the porch table. Jessica and Amanda, who were visiting, were playing with little Richard Robert on the grass. Jason watched the scene and realized how far they'd come since that chaotic day at the church. "What are you thinking about?" Emily asked, walking up to him. "About how funny life is. 2 years ago, I didn't know half the people here today, and now I can't imagine my life without them." "Do you regret anything?" Jason thought for a moment. "No, not even the scare at the altar. If that hadn't happened, maybe I'd never have met my biological family. Maybe our son would have never known his real grandparents." "And Richard, how do you feel about him now?" "He's my father," Jason said simply. "Not the only one, but one of them. He made a lot of mistakes, but he's trying to make things right. That's what matters." Just then, little Richard Robert ran up to them, followed by Richard. "Daddy, Grandpa Rich taught me how to make a paper airplane," the boy said excitedly. "That's awesome," Jason smiled. "Does it fly well?" "It does. Want to see?" The boy ran back to the grass, where he launched his paper airplane. The whole family stopped what they were doing to watch the little plane's flight, clapping when it landed softly on the grass. "Thank you," Jason said quietly to Richard. "For what?" "For teaching me it's never too late to start over." Richard smiled, and for the first time in decades, it was a smile completely free of guilt. The end of the story. Now tell me, what did you think of this emotional and twist-filled story? Where are you watching from? Do you think Jason made the right choice by forgiving Richard? And Sarah, was she brave to move closer to the family? Leave your honest opinion in the comments. I love reading what you think. Don't forget to like if the story moved you, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one. Thank you so much for your company.